Welcome everyone. I'm Shamuta from the Calcutta Research Group. We are very happy to welcome you all to our webinar, Security at Crossroads, Land, Food, Water, which is part of CRG's ongoing research currently, which seeks to problematize and open up the idea of security studies and concentrate more on human security. To talk more about this way in which we are approaching the question of security, and also to moderate tonight's discussion, we have with us Professor Shobhoshachi Boshurai Choudhury, who is both the president of the Calcutta Research Group and also a professor of political science at Rabindra Bharati University, apart from having been a former honorary director of Calcutta Research Group. So welcome Shobhoshachi, and over to you.
Thank you, Shamuta. I once again welcome all of you, all the participants and all the discussants today to this special webinar on security at Crossroads, Land, Food, Water, organized by CRG. Security is essentially a contested concept, we know, and its meaning depends on both the context and perspective. Historically, security studies took the state as its main reference point and analyzed security issues more top-down, either from the perspective of international state system or by focusing on state-level decision-making processes. Broadly speaking, security studies has been preoccupied with the protection of borders from international threats and with ensuring state capacity to counter such threats militarily. However, over the years, we know that having grown out of a more general epistemological critique, major questions have been raised, particularly after the recent pandemic, about how knowledge regarding security is constituted or reconstituted, who and what is to be secured, and what assumptions and logics underline and reproduce the enactment and theorization of security. It is being argued also that nation security cannot be fully accomplished without people's security. Concern for security emerges from a sense of insecurity. Dominant security discourse has been primarily marked by, we can say, in national security issues, thereby often ignoring the everyday security issues of human beings across the globe. Insecurity is not given. It is socially produced through actors calling attention to certain issues and mobilizing support to address them. Any actor constructs the idea of insecurity as an existential threat. The retreat of welfare states and the meteoric rise of neoliberal economies have generated neoliberal societies with neoliberal ethics, making the populist states and market-oriented societies more prone to informalization, casualization, and platformization of labor, making states more oblivious towards the increased vulnerabilities of unorganized labor, refugees, minorities, women, migrants, and the other marginalized groups living on the edge of the economy, law, and society, perhaps making the issue of justice more critical. The neoliberal reforms have been socially divisive, leading to dispossession of land, loss of livelihoods, and decline of agricultural incomes in rural areas, which have exacerbated poverty and inequalities. This period has been marked by increased distress in the agrarian sector, for instance, as there was a drastic reduction of public investment in agriculture and decreased state support for small and marginal farmers. This has created an exodus of rural workers, both agricultural and non-agricultural, into the towns and cities. In 2022, 2 years back, the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, published a special report entitled New Threats to Human Security in the Anthropocene, demanding greater solidarity. This report included diagnosis of the problems and of limitations in the existing analysis and the proposals for enriched analysis and policy response. The report noted high and increasing levels of insecurity, both objective insecurity, for example, in terms of environmental threats, health threats, violence, displacement, and felt insecurity, which was not least in the countries whose objective measures of development like income, education, longevity improve and or were already high. The report also noted the impact of global interconnections, intersections, and feedbacks across many sectors and populations that could generate unforeseen effects, exclusions, reactions, and crises. It highlighted the correlation of felt insecurity with low levels of trust. This special report published by the UNDP, it really, proposed a revival and intensification of research on human insecurity or human security for that matter, and their implications for politics, conflict, and solidarity or lack of solidarity. So in this larger scenario, although not in the specific context of this special report of the UNDP in any case, CRG organizes this webinar to search for alternatives to the dominant discourse on security or insecurity. We have three very distinguished speakers in this webinar. They are Dr. Rajendran Narayanan, Dr. Meenakshi Nair, Ambujam, and Dr. Gopal Krishna. So our first speaker would be Dr. Rajendran Narayanan, and Narayanan teaches in the School of Arts and Sciences at Azim Premji University, Bengaluru. At this university, he has been anchoring a curriculum called Data, Democracy, and Development. After obtaining his PhD degree in statistics from Cornell University, Ithaca, United States of America, he has held different academic positions at the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, Cornell University, and Ashoka University, Sonpat. He is interested in building bridges between research, advocacy, and public engagement, which led him to be a founding member of an organization called LibTech India. LibTech India works with an array of researchers, civil society organizations, and governments across some states on improving transparency and accountability on rural social policies. Rajendran is part of national campaigns such as those involved in the promotion of constitutional values, human rights, right to work, right to food, etc. He is also interested in demystifying economics and in understanding what the proliferation of data and over-reliance on technological processes mean for citizenship and participatory democracy. So it is over to Rajendran now. And I request the three panelists to restrict initially their presentation within 15 minutes, and we can discuss later so that we can have a broader discussion on these issues. So it's over to you, Rajendran. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Calcutta Research Group, for giving me an opportunity to participate in this very important discussion. I will, for today's discussion, I'm going to focus on the questions of food security in particular. And a lot of what I'm going to discuss is actually very pertinent, relevant, and contemporary issues that are being very actively taken up by the Right to Food campaign. And a lot of these inputs are actually flowing from the Right to Food campaign, which has been at the forefront of food security in the country. In fact, the Right to Food campaign was formed sometime in 2001, and their sustained efforts through the years with intervention in the court with the very famous PUCL versus Union of India case in 2001, that actually through a series of court orders, it finally led to the National Food Security Act in 2013, which was part of the slew of rights-based legislations from 2005 to 2013. So now, before I get into some specifics, I think it's I'll just discuss what the current coverage of NFSA, or the National Food Security Act, is. Now, as per the National Food Security Act, 67% of the households in India are covered, of which 67% is arrived at, it's a kind of weighted average of 75% in rural, 75% of the households in rural areas and 50% of the households in urban areas. And there is a quota given in each state to ensure that the coverage does not exceed this limit. Now, this entire identification of households is based on the 2011 census. As we all know, one of the biggest tragedy and travesty that's happened over the since 2000 for the last 10 years is that the census, which is supposed to be conducted once every 10 years, has not happened. So the census was supposed to happen in 2021, but it's not happened yet. And it's also, there is no announcement as to when the next census is going to happen. Now, this has very important ramifications for the rights holders who are accessing rations under the National Food Security Act. And just to give you a little more on the NFSA, which is the National Food Security Act, it covers very important aspects of food security, such as the public distribution system through which all these households who are registered as part of NFSA are entitled to getting grains at a very subsidized rate from the ration shops in villages and in cities as well. There is also a very important provision for midday meal for children, which guarantees that every child within a certain class can go to their schools and hot cooked meals will be provided within the school premises itself. In addition, there are other very important aspects of this legislation, such as the Integrated Child Development Scheme and so on. Now, one important ramification that's happened is that since there's been no 2011, there's been no updation of which are the households that should get rations in the 67% households. Now, the projected population in India in 2024 is around 145 crore. And there are estimates by economists such as Deepa Sinha who suggest that roughly 13 crore additional people would have to be provided ration cards, but they are excluded only because the census has not been done yet. Now, that's a major, we are talking about massive exclusions just because of one important national work that needs to be done that hasn't been undertaken yet. Now, there's another important facet, which is that we all remember the whole migrant worker crisis that happened due to the lockdown that was imposed in March 2020, and subsequently even during the second wave and so on in 2021. Now, when the migrant worker crisis happened, and based on the distress faced by the migrant workers, there was a Supreme Court case that was taken up to deal with issues of food security and livelihood security of workers. And subsequently, the Supreme Court has issued orders as well. And in fact, the Supreme Court has pulled up the union government and the states to increase ration card coverage. But of course, because no census has been conducted, this has not happened yet. Now, the Supreme Court very recently also asked the union government to say that, okay, you haven't done the census, but you can at least use the projected population numbers to increase the coverage. But we are in a very strange kind of situation because the union government has said that the coverage can be increased only after the next census is completed, and the next census has been indefinitely postponed. Subsequently, in 2023, the Supreme Court then ordered that at least 8 crore workers, which is roughly 80 million workers, who are enrolled in this government portal, which was created, which was a portal that was created, which acts as a database of unorganized sector workers. The Supreme Court said that at least all those unorganized workers who are registered in this e-Shram portal, Shram is labor, this electronic Shram portal, at least ensure that none of them are not having ration. Make sure that at least these 8 crore individuals have ration cards and they can access rations. But in a very surprising move, if you look at the budgetary numbers, budget heads this year, even before this Supreme Court order was again issued before this year's budget was done. And what is surprising is, despite this court order to say increase the coverage for at least 8 crore more workers in the country, the budgetary allocation for food subsidy this year is actually lower than the revised estimates of food security from last year. And some of these issues were brought up in a press conference by the Right to Food campaign, highlighting some of these issues. This is a context in which this is a kind of broad-based exclusion that we are talking about because of lack of census, because of lack of compliance of many of these Supreme Court orders. Now, what has happened subsequently is even more contentious and egregious, I would say. Very recently, there has been an ultimatum given by the union government. And the ultimatum says that by the 30th of September, all the ration card holders in the country, and there are about 81 crore ration card holders, which roughly about 810 million individuals who are right now covered by the National Food Security Act having this ration card. Now, this ration card is a very critical document, not just to access rations, but for a lot of other schemes. The access to a lot of other schemes are dependent on you having a ration card. So it almost serves as a very fundamental identity card, for the lack of a better word. Now, what the union government has done is that they have given this new mandate. They are saying that by 30th of September, all the ration card holders have to complete something called the EKYC. EKYC stands for Electronic Know Your Customer. And what that means is every ration card holder has to go to their specific ration dealer from whom they draw the grains on a monthly basis. And they have to use the Aadhaar-based biometric authentication system to ensure that there is a linkage of the Aadhaar card of the individual with the ration card of the individual. And the union government has given the ultimatum that if they don't do this within the stipulated time, they will stop getting rations. Now, and it's not just one member of the household or the head of the household that has to do this, but they have mandated that every individual who is having their name within a ration card has to do it. Okay, so what that means is, suppose there are 4 members in a household, and let's say the mother and 2 children are in a village, and let's say the father or the husband of the woman is working as a migrant worker somewhere. Let's say the village is in Chhattisgarh and the husband is working somewhere in Delhi. Then the husband has to come to this village in Chhattisgarh only to do the biometric authentication at the ration shop to ensure that that person's Aadhaar number is linked to the ration card of the household, and then has to go back. And this is just a diktat given by the union government. Now, this digital form also has a field, this kind of digital linking of one's Aadhaar with ration card, also has a field to link one's mobile number for the EKYC process to succeed. And the telephone, the mobile number, and an OTP is sent to this mobile number for another layer of verification. And in many states, in some states, there is only 60 seconds available for this kind of OTP verification. Now, just to put this in context, there are many places which are extremely remote in the country where even if you are a resident of that village, to draw rations, you cannot just go to your ration dealer and do this authentication. The ration dealer and the people, they go to another area in the village where there is more likelihood of getting connectivity, and then there is no guarantee that the connectivity will happen. So only after all these hurdles are crossed will you actually start, will your ration card be authenticated with this entire system called electronic KYC. And the tricky part is that the rights holder has no option not to consent, although there is a consent form that pops up in this entire eKYC platform. The rights holder has no option not to consent, because if the consent is supposed to be, it's a consent form, right? So it's not mandatory in that sense. But if this consent form, you don't go through this process, then your rations might stop. So basically, it's peremptory. People are demanded, but they're not given any choice. And because of such stringent requirements, what happens is the security is particularly people who are affected are the elderly, people with any kind of disability, migrants who are, as I said, as the example I said, from different people. And there are reports, the Right to Food campaign recently did a press conference where there are reports that there are testimonies that people have had to spend over 6,000 rupees just to go back to their village because the entire family, let's say, has migrated temporarily to a city. They have to go back to their village, do the entire authentication, and then come. And even then, things did not work. And there is no official communication from the Food and Civil Supplies Department to the individual when this entire process of digital dance, if I may call it, does not work. In fact, what is even more interesting is that this entire process of doing this eKYC business, of doing this electronic authentication, etc., has been given to the ration card dealer. And it is very well understood historically that the ration card dealer's role is only to procure rations from the Food and Civil Supplies Department and disperse the rations to the ration card holders. They do not have any other powers. And by giving this kind of extra power to the ration card dealer, we are again toying with the entire power asymmetry, possibility of elite capture that can happen in rural areas, which are very routine and very common. So that's a huge problem, I would say. It's a very messy affair. So that's on the food security aspect of it. Maybe I'll just take 3 or 4 minutes and just talk about a couple of more things which are broadly under the ambit of NFSA. One very important aspect of the National Food Security Act was that the maternity entitlement provision under the NFSA that every lactating mother and a new mother with a newborn baby is entitled to a maternity entitlement of 6,000 rupees. And the 6,000 rupees is given to the mother in terms of cash transfer in 3 different installments. And as per the NFSA in 2013, you can get this maternity entitlement maybe for 3 children, 4 children, whatever. There's no limitation or restriction. And it's a very crucial lifeline for the simple reason that when for new mothers, they are not in a position to, they don't have a maternity leave. We are talking about large scale casual labor, casual workers. So when they are not able to work, they lose the wages that they would have got otherwise. So this is a very important, very progressive aspect of the National Food Security Act. But what has happened since is since the BJP government came to power in 2014, the whatever provisions are there in the National Food Security Act of maternity entitlements of 6,000 rupees per child has been whittled down. So right now, under the maternity entitlements, a pregnant woman or a young mother is only given 5,000 rupees, and that too only for a single child. So that's a huge whittling down of the provisions of, in fact, it's a violation of NFSA, and there has been no revision of this amount either. So there is, if you look at Tamil Nadu, I think has 18,000 rupees or something, very good amount as far as maternity entitlements are concerned. And there has been no pegging to inflation, nothing of that sort has happened. It's stagnated and it's a violation. That's one very important thing. And the third thing that I would like to talk about, which has also been brought up which was recently a lot of where social activists in Telangana wrote a letter to the Chief Minister of Telangana, where they've outlined very important issues concerning midday meals of children. That's another very important aspect. Now, midday meals, as per the NFSA again, the provision is that children are supposed to get hot cooked meals in the schools, and there is a provision for having a kitchen in the school premises itself, so that there are multiple advantages of doing that. One is, of course, the fact that you get the produce is local. The second thing is it serves as an employment and livelihood opportunity for women in that area, with preference given to people from marginalized Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi backgrounds. And also that in the event of there is the monitoring and evaluation of whatever is happening through the midday meals can be done locally, because every day the kitchen is there. So whether the quality of the food is appropriate, whether children are getting nutritious proteins every day, etc., is that kind of monitoring can happen locally. Yeah. But now what has happened is there is a drive, especially in Telangana, there was a drive to do a pilot to do some kind of centralized kitchen system, which has been outsourced to, this has been done in Karnataka as well, with the Akshay Patra Foundation, which is part of this entire ISKCON system. And the centralized kitchen has a lot of problems, and among many other problems of loss of livelihood, lack of giving importance to decentralized systems, inability to monitor the quality of food that's being given to children. A very important ramification is that the food supplied by organizations like Akshay Patra Foundation is considered to be sattvic food, which means they do not have onions, they do not have garlics, they do not have eggs. There's absolutely no meat. If there is no onion, garlic, forget about meat. So there are lots of, and this is literally playing with a child's development and growth, and it's very well established that child's growth and lifelong nutrition is highly dependent on the kind of nutritional intake that a child has in its early years. So these are some very grave challenges, I would say, that we are facing for food security. And I would just like to end by saying this entire process of governance that we see over the last 10 years is something which I call digital feudalism, because it's an ultimatum that if you don't get in line, you're out, your rights are violated. And everything is done through a digital medium. I'm not saying digital itself is necessarily bad. Of course, there are important positives that one can gain through digitization, but with no accountability framework, with no monitoring framework of whether digitization is happening, keeping in mind constitutional rights of individuals, we are running into a grave danger. So as there's a friend called Vanita in her thesis, Vanita Falcao in her thesis, she uses the term digital washing, which is akin to greenwashing that was used earlier in the United States. That by saying everything is digitized, you are assuming, you're giving a signal. It's more a PR work than actual improving access on the ground. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajendran, for flagging some of the major issues in relation to food security today. And now we shall move on to our next speaker, Dr. Meenakshi Nair Ambujam. And Meenakshi is a Swiss National Science Foundation postdoctoral fellow affiliated to the Department of International Development at the University of Oxford. She obtained her PhD in anthropology and sociology from the Geneva Graduate Institute in 2022 and worked as a research fellow at the Czech Academy of Sciences before moving to Oxford. Her doctoral research examined the entanglement of land and bureaucracy by centering on the mundane and quotidian material practices involving only or primarily paperwork in Telangana. Building and expanding on her doctoral research, her ongoing project focuses on digital and governance technologies and specifically examines how practices intended to produce transparency and legibility may unwittingly co-produce opacity and illegibility. So it's over to Meenakshi now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just share my screen and I hope that works.
Yeah, it does.
Perfect. And also, hi, everybody. I know it's late in India, so thank you for being here. You're 69 or 70 people, that's a lot. And also, thank you so much, Samatha and Sucharita, for the invitation, of course, to CRG as well. And it's lovely to share space with both Rajendran and Gopal, whose works I've read on multiple fora, even though I've never met them in person, so it's an honor. My talk today dwells on issues of land security by exploring what it means to have secure land rights and how practices intended to render land rights secure may lead to insecurity. Now, unlike Rajendran's talk, mine is based on a very microcosm or a micro example, so I'm not going to talk broadly, I'm going to actually be very specific. So it may or may not resonate with you, but I think that there are things that would still come across that holds true for the rest of India. So security, when I was asked to speak about this topic, I went to the dictionary and I looked at how is security defined. Then I thought it's an interesting word because one, it's a noun. It may refer to the state of being free from danger or threat, denote measures taken to achieve that. It may refer to something that provides a sense of certainty, safety, or a guarantee. So let's say like job security, food security, or in the context of finance, something like a deposit. But security in the context of land, however, I think needs to be thought of as an action word, like a verb, if you will, something that is processual, something that needs to be constantly worked upon so that it doesn't get undone. This is especially so when we center on the land security of Adivasis who have been repeatedly dispossessed and displaced from their lands by various actors, including dominant caste communities, real estate developers, corporate interests, and the state. Land security, moreover, is also touted by various UN reports as a precondition for reducing poverty, inequality, realizing gender equality, economic prosperity, addressing and mitigating climate change. So there's a laundry list, right? And thus critical to realizing several sustainable development goals. But land also has a social life. It is tied to memory, to identity, to belonging, to ways of being, and much more. Now, you have scholars like Nikita Sood who call land as a multi-dimensional object. It alters and varies in shape and form and is dynamic. So it is in this context that it becomes pertinent to ask what shape and form does land security take in everyday life? And how is it mobilized in socio-legal juridic spaces? And how is security experienced, bolstered, or even undone? So I attempt to touch upon some of these aspects, albeit not all, by drawing on my doctoral research, where I examined how and why Adivasis in specific scheduled areas in Telangana continue to experience conditions of landlessness despite possessing title deeds to land. So here I primarily looked at Adivasis who managed to secure land titles from the state, be it through land distribution schemes or litigation, and what happened after they got hold of the title. So I look at revenue lands and not forest lands, FYI. So documents thus became central to how I understood what it meant to have secure land rights and eventually what it meant to have land. The Adivasi interlocutors I worked with, as well as bureaucrats, lawyers and activists I spoke to, told me that having secure rights to land required proper and sound documents. So much like the ration card that Rajendran was speaking about earlier. In fact, during my research, Adivasis who didn't have valid records and land records and documents lost out on Raitu Bandhu. So this was a farmers investment support scheme launched in Telangana in 2018, which at the time, so in 2018 and 19 is when I did fieldwork. So at the time it provided 4,000 rupees per acre of land per cultivation cycle, which amounts to 8,000 rupees per acre of land back then per year. Now it is 10,000 rupees per acre of land per year per cultivator. So claiming Raitu Bandhu requires having one's documents, the patta, which is the title deed, and the record of rights, the pahani and all of these other things, in order. Therefore, the importance of land documents, whether to fight cases in court, to access welfare programs, or even establish one's right to land is critical to underscore. Moreover, even today, several Adivasi communities across the country are fighting for land titles. So we need to put that in this perspective too. For this is linked to them experiencing secure land rights, or so the narrative goes. So early on in my fieldwork, I stumbled upon three phrases that were often repeated to me. The first, "Kagaz aur kalam kabhi jhoot nahi bolte." The paper and the pen never lie. The next, "Patta unte adi oka belame." Having the title is a strength. And lastly, sound documents for secure land rights. For my Adivasi interlocutors, the first two statements, "Kagaz aur kalam kabhi jhoot nahi bolte," as well as "Patta unte adi oka balame," affirmed their faith in land documents and the ability of these documents to legalize and validate their claims to land. In other words, provide a sense of security of ownership and possession. For bureaucrats, lawyers, and NGO activists, the phrase "sound documents for secure land rights" helped elucidate, or rather capture, the idea that clear land records were at the heart of securing and protecting land rights. This is especially so in cases of land conflicts or contestations where ownership and possession are adjudicated and determined through land documents. In this way, an intimate relationship between land rights and bureaucratically produced land documents is highlighted by multiple stakeholders. At the land rights sensitization workshops I attend, these were organized by lawyers and current and former bureaucrats of the Telangana Revenue Administration. This relationship was emphasized upon even further. So the concept of or secure land rights, as was explained to us, the attendees back then, consisted of three components that you can see in this Venn diagram. And this was the Venn diagram they used back then. So it consisted of physical possession of land, name and records, and having title deed or the patta. One of the speakers of the session then remarked, one can only feel secure about one's land rights when you have your name in the concerned records, hold the title, and have the physical possession of land. In the absence of any one of the following, you have insecure land rights. Through the Venn diagram shown here, he explained that the goal is to get to point one, which is basically the intersection of all of those three circles. For the most part of these seminars that I attended, the focus was on how to get hold of records and documents and the necessity of these documents to experience meaningful land rights. It was also reiterated that conditions of insecurity were primarily produced when you did not have records. And this gains further traction when speaking of Adivasi's land rights, especially considering the nature of dispossession and displacement they've faced, the struggles they've endured to get titles, as well as the land alienation they've experienced because dominant caste communities have forged land documents to usurp their lands. But what does sound document to secure land rights mean? Like, does this always lead to that? While indeed, if one is in possession of one's land, gaining documents can be critical. After all, possession is considered 9/10 of the law, and the legal recognition to this right by way of a title is considered to seal the deal. So you get the last 10th. Of course, this doesn't mean that dispossession or displacement won't happen in the future. Nevertheless, documents acknowledge the rights to land and offer some sort of security in terms of contestation and dispute, because you can argue your case, unlike circumstances where you don't have a title. But what about instances where this isn't the case? What happens when legal recognition comes to you before the land physically gets to you? So how does one then grapple with insecurity that follows, which renders the plot of land quite slippery and untenable? What I would do is turn to two ethnographic vignettes to illustrate some of the complexities that render land security tricky and slippery when it's not very straightforward as we usually see. So in February 2019, I met Rupa Bai, who belonged to the Pradhan Adivasi community for the first time. Armed with a bag full of documents, title deeds old and new, copies of land records, and innumerable petitions and receipts she had submitted to concerned bureaucrats, she told me that her land could not be found. Though titles and other documents indicated that this plot of land, an extent of 4.20 acres, was located in a place that I call Butla in Utnur, neither Rupa Bai nor the Patwari, the official responsible for maintaining the land records of the village, could find the land. Rupa Bai's quest for this land began in 1989 when she first received the title as part of a land distribution program. Unfortunately, the location of the plot of land was simply not shown to her, thus making it difficult for her to gain meaningful possession of this plot. It is often assumed that titles are distributed to lands already in one's possession, thereby bolstering one's land rights and remedying insecurity. However, many phases of land distribution in Utnur, for instance, began with the issuance of titles without correspondingly showing where the land lay. Though on paper, Adivasis like Rupa Bai seemed landed, having benefited from the scheme, on the ground, their landlessness persisted, amounting to insecurity. In Rupa Bai's case, where she approached the Patwari several times over the past many years to determine the location of the land, the Patwari only told her that he could not find the land and it is there somewhere in Butla. Not giving up, Rupa Bai approached the Mandal revenue officer, the bureaucrat to whom the Patwari reports. He reassured Rupa Bai by telling her, when you have the title and all these documents, where will your land go? You have the land, ma. It's there only. It must be there somewhere. Rupa Bai's experience is peculiar, but not uncommon. Similar issues of possessing titles without land have also been reported in other parts of India. In 2018, a report drew attention to how 22 Dalit families in Gujarat were yet to get physical possession of lands to which there were issued titles decades ago. Similarly, in March 2020, a newspaper report on Kerala's Zero Landless Scheme, a program launched in 2013, states some beneficiaries have been paying tax for their land for the past years, but the only glitch is that they do not know where it is. Though the government gave the title deeds to the beneficiaries, the plots were not demarcated and assigned to them. Land insecurity in these cases takes on a perverse form. On the one hand, all documents provided to Rupabai affirm her rights, validate them, uphold them. Similarly, the MRO and the Patwari reassure her that having the documents means that her land will not go anywhere. On the other hand, the unknowability of the location of this plot of land, which prevents her from actively taking possession of it, also enlivens forms of insecurity, which are often overlooked by the very mechanisms and institutions that are in place to protect her rights. Let's move to a second vignette. So in 1983, Chitru Garu, who hailed from the Gond Adivasi community, received a notice from the Special Deputy Collector's office inviting him and Seth, a non-Adivasi, to bring all material evidence regarding a plot of land, which I shall call survey number 2/126. Chitru Garu had filed a case against Seth, mobilizing the Land Transfer Regulation Act, which prohibits the transfer of land from Adivasi to non-Adivasi persons, but also between non-Adivasi persons in scheduled areas of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. The only exceptions are transfers that took place between Adivasis and non-Adivasis before the 1st of December 1963 and between non-Adivasis before 3rd of February 1970. Chitru Garu contended that Seth had encroached upon his land, fabricated records, and evicted him from his land. In narrating his incident, he told me, "Idi agency prantam kada, mana bhumi valini dagare ela jarugutundi. Isn't this a scheduled area? How can my land go to him?" The outcome of the hearing was straightforward. Chitru Garu actually won the case, and the MRO was ordered to restore the ownership and possession of land to him. And this was in 1983. When I met Chitru Garu in 2019, he still did not have his land. He had his title, copies of the land registry, notices and orders, and many other documents, including the Panchnama, all of which stated that he was the Pattadar of survey number 2/126. It was another matter that Chitru Garu, much like Rupabai, had failed to access or possess his land for over 2 decades. Seth and his family never let Chitru Garu take over the plot. Moreover, despite multiple complaints, nothing materialized. Patwari after Patwari, MRO after MRO told Chitru Garu the same thing. When you have the documents, why worry? The land is yours. That Chitru Garu was unable to gain possession over the land for which his rights were legally sanctioned and recognized was almost lost on both the Patwari and the MRO. Here, historically contingent socio-political relationships of power along the lines of caste, class, religion, money, and more effectively rendered Chitru Garu's land rights insecure, even as juridic and legal institutions affirmed them. This disconnect between ownership and possession, despite all the records he had, demonstrates how law and bureaucratic practices intended to protect and secure the rights of Adivasis can often produce outcomes to the contrary. Because issuing titles and land documents is an administrative task that is often considered slightly easier than physically, transferring the land because of land's own materiality. People like Chitru Garu and Rupabai, those who received documents following litigation and land distribution schemes, found themselves in these slightly peculiar or impossible situations, where all the documents suggested that they were landed, while in reality, the land never reached them. Moreover, in these conditions, much like experiences of Rupabai and Chitru Garu, negotiating with the bureaucracy was also a task in and of itself. It required time, money, effort, and an insurmountable will to not be exhausted from the process because it spans generations and decades and all of those things. These vignettes also draw attention to the importance of sequence, something that we don't think about a lot when we talk about land rights and land distribution. The papers, titles, and other documents reached Adivasis before the land was handed over. So this meant that legal recognition of land rights did not accompany a physical transfer of land, and they weren't going side by side. These documents also therefore helped mask in certain ways forms of land insecurity and landlessness they sought to remedy in the first place. Land security, thus, in these contexts was not a given. It had to be constantly negotiated, claimed, and put together. In other words, it needed constant action and it had to be verbed out. What these vignettes also reveal is how land security can be slippery and fleeting and does not operate in a vacuum, but is entrenched and saturated in deeper relations of power that are historically contingent, politically contingent, and socially mediated. So that's about it from me today. Forward to your questions later on.
Thank you very much, Meenakshi, for very interesting comments on land rights and land security. And our Third and last speaker would be Dr. Gopal Krishna. Dr. Gopal Krishna is a law, philosophy, and public policy researcher, lawyer, and a bilingual writer on the subject of science, river basin, environmental and occupational health, ecocide, disarmament, consciousness of big data, citizenship, agriculture, and justice. He has formally studied law, philosophy, mass communication, and public health. He has authored reports, papers, and book chapters on Kosi, Ganga River Basin, and on interlinking of rivers, including diversion of rivers. He has been a co-petitioner against Ganga Waterway Project in the National Green Tribunal. Holding a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, on the subject of corporate crimes with specific reference to industrial disaster of Bhopal, Gopal's postdoctoral work was on interstate migrants in the shipbreaking industry and data justice. He is the editor of Toxics Watch and has delivered expert testimonies before the Indian, European, and German parliamentary committees in the matter of national and international legislations, civil liability for nuclear damage bill, Consumer Protection Act, Biological Diversity Amendment Bill, right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement bill, National Identification Authority of India Bill, hazardous waste trade, and corporate code of conduct. Gopal is also a member of the Calcutta Research Group. Yes, Dr. Gopal.
Thank you, Sabyasachi. In the beginning, Sabyasachi referred to at least two narratives about security. One is state-centric, and the other is, community-centric or population-centric. Or one is national security, other is human-centric. And he also referred to a UNDP report, I think of 2022, which dealt with human security. So I want to begin with the UN, what has been happening with regard to water security in the UN. But before I do that, I want to flag this aspect which most researchers know, that my talk on water security is going to be linked with what Rajendran and Meenakshi say in a tangential way. For instance, in water research, we know that food is virtual water. So I will not elaborate on it. And on land question in water management and water resources, we know that land and water coexist. And land becomes non-land because of erosion. It becomes something else. It is but I will be speaking from some few documents, which few deliberations which happened at the UN level with regard to security narrative. I read the concept note of the CRG and it was quite rich in its insights. So it creates a compelling logic for me to take the discussion forward from both these presentations and also from the concept note. The UN Security Council, okay, let me tell you the last document on water security, which I have read, is a 17-page document, draft document published by NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And the title of the paper is Turning the Tide, Addressing the Impact of Water Insecurity on Allied Security. So this securitization and why these documents are coming at this moment, I will just flag them and then come to what is happening in our country. In 2021, in December 2021, UN Security Council attempted to discuss or establish climate crisis as a national security issue. This was the third time the UN Security Council attempted unsuccessfully to establish a national security narrative for climate crisis. The first attempt they had made was in 2007, when the G77 and China countries, that group, opposed that discussion because they said that climate discussion, environmental discussion belongs to UN framework on climate change, UNFCCC Secretariat and those conference of parties. In 2011, there was an attempt. In 2020 also, there was an attempt. The German draft was ready, but USA, India, China opposed that draft. At that time, Trump was the president in USA. So it was opposed. And the last was, as I was saying, that in 2021, the UN Security Council draft resolution was vetoed by Russia, as China abstained, India opposed it. So the attempt, and before that, in 2007, when the attempt was underway, I had written a research paper where I had posed the question, who wants the national security to get established with regard to climate crisis and with regard to environmental crisis? There was a research in US by all the military establishments of US to how to inspire action on climate based on national security narrative. It was a military wisdom, military thinking, which wants climate crisis to be discussed that way. Coming to water security, which is very important because water is in the atmosphere, water is in the ocean, water is in the land, water is in the food. So water is, and the impact of climate crisis and environmental crisis is going to be felt first and foremost on water resources because of water severity. So the reason I begin with this is that we had done a report on Ganga in 2003, which was published in Kathmandu. And in this report, this was on conflict over Ganga. Jaswant Singh's book, Defending India, is quoted. I'm just quoting few lines from that quotation, but from that book. He says, in respect of the Ganga, the difficulties with Farakka and Bangladesh are only illustrative. A study by Terry suggests that by the turn of the century, the Ganga basin alone would be supporting human population of around 550 million. If in this kind of dependence, problems were to arise, what then would be the consequence to national security? So the military thinking is deeply concerned and is looking at the question of water security, environmental security, and climate security from a state perspective. Is the state case on the problem? But how do people respond to it? So the World Bank defines legality, illegality, and extra-legality. And the concept note of the CRG deals with a very interesting concept, which is the periphery of the legality. So when water resources are talked about, it has to be talked about in the context of river basins and watersheds, macro watersheds as well as micro watersheds. So in the context of Ganga River Basin, we notice how, not only within the context of Ganga River Basin, across the world, the proponent, most importantly, when UN Security Council failed to get the national security narrative endorsed, World Economic Forum has started with the narrative that water security is a national security issue. And now, as I mentioned in the beginning, NATO has come out with the issue on how the NATO allies and NATO members are going to be impacted by water security. There is an agenda at work to drive the national security narrative. Coming to the water security from the human beings perspective. So we have today some, and I'm saying this because we are speaking in the shadow of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and also Fukushima. So today we have 14,500 nuclear weapons in 9 countries. 2,000 nuclear tests have been done. We don't know what is the water footprint of those tests. 500 nuclear reactors are there. Some 23 nuclear reactors are there in India in 8 nuclear power plants. And in Ganga water basin, there are one nuclear plant is there in Narora, in Bulandshahr in UP, on the bank of river Ganga, and another one is coming at Rupur in Pabna in Bangladesh, 160 kilometers from Dhaka. So does these measures by the state and the proponents of who are concerned, does these measures on water in the river basin without factoring in the water footprint add to water security? So what one has understood over the years while doing the work on water, and especially with regard to interlinking of rivers, which is a misnomer for diversion of 39 rivers, is that the economic rationality is against water cycle. This economic rationality is against biological cycle. They think, and I have the task force terms of reference document with me. It says water which goes to sea is wasted. In Tamil Nadu, there is a saying that the sea begins in the mountains. Even the common community folk wisdom is there, which says there is a water cycle from mountain to the sea. It's a one water cycle. But the economic rationality is such that there is an institution called National Water Development Agency, whose only task, whose only mandate is to link this river irrespective of environmental consequences and human consequences. We, under the national climate in India, to respond to climate crisis, there were 8 mission documents created. One of those mission documents was National Water Mission. That National Water Mission document, and there is another mission document which deals with National Mission on Indian Himalayan Ecosystem. So both these documents are caught in a time warp or maybe in economic rationality. Given the fact that water in a river basin is not a pipeline through which water will pass. It is land, water, flora, fauna, the entire biological diversity. So when water security is talked about, we are not only talking about water security, we are talking about biological diversity, we are talking about land coexisting with water. And because of colonial legacy, that separation of land and water has happened, which has not been addressed so far. So what we witness is that what institutions like World Bank or other international financial institutions, they have not only segregated water and land, they have also segregated the issue of water quality and quantity. In places like, for instance, in Patancheru in Andhra Pradesh, World Bank funds a project for water quality study. Then they fund a project for water quality improvement in Ganga. And then they fund a project for damming Ganga upstream. So what they don't realize is that when flow of water in Ganga or any other river is depleted, water quality deteriorates. When water quality deteriorates, water quantity, even if it is available in abundance, it creates water insecurity. So this gulf between different conception of water quantity, water quality, land security being separate from water security, and also biological diversity to be addressed elsewhere. This gulf is there in all UN documents, in World Bank documents, in official narratives. When we were doing the Ganga study, we were amazed to find that we were amazed to find the water policies of South America, that all the water policies of national governments, of state governments, they read like photocopies of each other. It seems that somebody else drafted it and they simply photocopied it or copy pasted it. So why I'm underlining this is that in the case of water security, we need to realize that water quality deterioration is happening not only through industrial effluents and sewage, but also through depletion of flow in the rivers. So that also is something which needs to be addressed. Well, towards the end, and I will cover other grounds during the question answer session maybe. Towards the end, I would say that there is a UN Convention on non-navigational uses of water courses. It has come into force. This is 10 years. It came into force in 2014. It was adopted in 1997. 36 countries have ratified this UN Convention on non-navigational uses of water, international water courses. This is, and there is a controversy about one Article 7 of this convention. So no a big country, no, I think none of the big countries like India, China, Russia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Russia, none of the Himalayan region, no one has ratified this, but 36 countries have ratified it. It has come into force. The definition of water courses, international water courses, is so narrow, so parochial, that it thinks water is only a water flowing through the pipeline. And it is caught in the 1997 framework. It doesn't factor in climate crisis. It doesn't factor in water stress situations, water scarce situations post climate crisis. So there are many policy documents, projects which are unfolding. They are unfolding based on old data when water they assume to be surplus. And also water security is going to be a huge, insecurity is going to be a huge issue, because these water related infrastructure projects are unfolding under the assumption that some rivers have surplus water, although natural sciences do not admit of such a category. It is the engineering mindset which admits of surplus waters and deficit waters. So it is this surplus definition of some waters being surplus. For instance, in the India-Bangladesh Ganga Water Treaty, Ganga is defined as a water surplus river, but you can walk through Ganga in Kanpur and in many places. So if this is water surplus river, then in fact the entire data on which this interlinking of rivers project, or most recently during the budget, recent budget, Kosi-Mechi link was discussed. In the economic survey, Ken-Betwa river link was discussed, which is the world's biggest water infrastructure project. Also, it's a rewriting geography project, which is unfolding, which will bring in, unprecedented level of water insecurity, because these projects are unfolding on 1970s data, and that data does not hold true anymore. And in any case, the last report, the high-powered report of Government of India, was under Professor S.R. Azim, which was the National Commission on Integrated Water Resource Management. And that report came out in September 99. That report concluded that Himalayan rivers are unpredictable, and therefore they should not be touched for interbasin or intrabasin river transfer. So if Himalayan rivers are not to be touched, the entire logic behind interlinking of rivers falls, because then peninsular rivers are waiting for Himalayan rivers to reach them in Mahanadi. Both the sides, Himalayan component and peninsular component, start to link them. So I would say the world's most environmentally disastrous project, which is interlinking of rivers, is unfolding. It will cause regional tensions. It will cause international relations rupture between India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, India, China, and also within the country. Water scarce stress situation will create civil war-like situation. So I think it is time to adopt a river basin approach. The river basin, especially of Ganga, has been studied, but it is a truncated river basin which is they are advocating, which is 78% of the Ganga river basin, which is in India. 79% of the Ganga river basin, which is in India. 21% is in Nepal, Bangladesh, and in Tibet. So I think a holistic river basin approach and Himalayan watershed approach is required to ensure that we do not pursue the path which is causing landslides, which is causing subsidence of Himalayas. So I will last end by saying that the wisdom from the landslide tragedy from Kerala is that water has memory. Natural sciences have been saying it, that water keeps shouting, keeps talking. It is the engineering minds, engineering ears, which do not hear rivers talking, which does not hear water resources talking. So I think I have overshot the time. I will utilize question answer session to respond to some of the questions, some of the issues which I could not raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopalji. Thank you very much for your presentation. So we just listened to three very interesting presentations from three distinguished speakers on land security, food security, and water security. So before the questions come and before the comments come, may I request Professor Ranavi Shomadar to, just initiate the discussion with his comments. Professor Shomadar.
Oh, you have put me in trouble. I was just listening carefully and was not thinking of posing a question. Something that actually, when I was listening to the first presentation by Rajendran, I thought of it, and then Meenakshi and Gopal, which is that some of, I mean, there is an opinion in the human rights community that in the neoliberal era, there is a transition from the rights language to the security language. So in my youth, early youth, I witnessed the food movement in Bengal, which was a very violent and very popular movement in 1966. And it was preceded by, and it was also accompanied by what was called the Bihar famine at that time. And nobody talked of food security, but we all talked of, and it was called food movement. Even the right to food, that phrase too had not come, but food movement. And then came right to food, and then we hear about right to security. My introduction or initiation in political understanding and movements again came during the Naxalite era, when again we all caused of land struggles and peasants' right to land, land redistribution, etc. I never heard of this phrase land security. And Gopalji, the same for water. So my question is, and particularly for water, because rural Bengal, I'm quite sure Bihar also had the same thing. There was always scuffles, struggles between landowners and peasants on access to water. So my question is to all the three, and whenever you can answer, is this really a transition from a rights-based language to a security-based language? Or is it within the right-based language that this possibility of its metamorphosis into a security-based language would be there? And therefore, what would be the implication? Meaning that if we stick to the rights-based language, can we say that, no, we would not have this security-centric approach? And that would be better because the question of justice would be much more, how would I put it? It will be much more evident in the rights-based. But on the other hand, I also think that the beast, meaning the problem is there in the beast of the belly, the belly of the beast itself, that you cannot continue with the rights-based language for a long time with the intervention of court and everything, as happened with right to food. It then became food security. So that is all. So I would like to, at some point, listen to your reflections on that. Thank you, Shobhashachi.
Thank you, Ranabirda. And if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box.
I shall read out Faisal Alam's comment rather than question. I think it's more about, it's directed to Gopal, although it doesn't say so. And I also have a question of my own, which I would like to add to Meenakshi. Okay, so my question, Faisal Alam's question, rather comment is this: Bangladesh Rupur disaster will be more than Chernobyl. It's danger for whole. It is going to be a dangerous situation for whole of Bengal. What is I think the question is, what do the people of West Bengal think about what is happening in Bangladesh in terms of nuclear reactors? I have a question to Meenakshi, and I think it carries on a little from what you said your postdoctoral research is, but also ties in with Rajendran's presentation. So I am assuming that tribal land documents now would have also been digitized, or there would be some digital component to this. And Rajendran very like lucidly and pointedly showed us how what we recognize as digital divide continues to be digital divide, even when it is a question of something completely different, such as food security. So, what did you encounter when you were discussing exploring land security vis-a-vis the digital scale?
There is a question for Rajendran. So the question is from Ritojit, and it is in the context of your broader research, how do the claims that digitalization will eliminate fraud and streamline fund transfers compare with the actual outcomes observed in programs like NREGA, where digitalization has resulted in exclusion, increased opacity, and failed to address the fundamental issue of insufficient funding? So with these three, options, I think let us go to Rajendran first to respond to his kind of bouquet of questions and comments. Rajendran.
Thank you for the questions, and thank you for the comments, Professor Shamatar, Ranavita, and Shobho Shasuda. I'll probably try and respond to the question that Ranavita posed earlier. I think the way I see it is, I think it's not a transition from a rights-based to a security-based, but the way I perceive is that security is a subset of rights. So unless there is some notion of security, some base level of security, I think, in framing it another way, I can say that security is a necessary condition to get rights, but it is not a sufficient condition. Security on its own is not going to guarantee rights, or it's not going to be a way in which people feel empowered enough to be able to access their rights. Whereas rights is a stronger assertion, and if you have rights, then you definitely have security, but the converse is not true. So I think maybe the way we see the security-oriented approach is more of, at least can we get this for sure? Let's get this. So then the battle for rights is going to be incremental as opposed to be 0 or 1. So that's my understanding and take on that. Now, coming to the other question, which is in the context of the claim that yeah. Now, this is exactly the kind of digital washing that I was alluding to earlier. Because if think about it this way, if I have to think of it as a mathematical question, right? Now, if you try to have a very fancy algorithm, but if it solves a different problem, okay, I might have a very good method of solving something, but it does not solve the problem that is fundamentally needed. It solves some other problem. Now, then how good is that method? I can say that the method might be useful or useless, but it doesn't solve the problem at hand. So in the same way, the way my experience with Narega is the way digital tools have been employed in it has been actually dealing with, it's almost like, okay, I have a very good method, I have a very good technology, let me see where I can use it. Whether it is actually useful for the rights holder or not, that is secondary. And that's precisely what's happened with these, especially I'll talk about 2 tech interventions in Narega that the union government has done. One is called the National Mobile Monitoring System app, which is an attendance app that is created that every worker has to do at the work site. Now, the mate who's in charge of conducting all the operations at a work site, the mate is also part of the Narega work crew. The mate is supposed to take a photograph of all the workers, upload it on a server, and then ensure that, and then the attendance sheet is filled. And then there is actually, it's impossible for anyone to monitor a group of 30 workers' photograph and match it whether the worker who's standing second in the photograph is actually the person whose name is in the attendance sheet. But the union government has made it a big deal. And again, imposed it in the entire country, completely disregarding any kind of feedback that was coming from the ground. So that has actually been detrimental. And the way I see it is, it's more of an eyewash. It's you strangle the program through these kind of tech interventions that creates what in economics is called a discouraged worker effect. So the workers slowly start getting discouraged, saying, what is the point? I'm spending all my time doing this kind of technology, dance and yoga, where I may or may not get paid because my attendance may or may not get registered because of these kind of digital tools. So I would have worked for 10 days, but because my attendance would have been registered only for 3 days, I would not be paid for the remaining 7 days. So I would automatically get discouraged from participating in the program. So I'd fall out of the workforce of Narega. And when I fall out of the workforce of Narega, then the government will say that, oh, look, so 10 workers are working less in Narega, which implies that the demand for the program has gone down, which means that I can fund less for the program. So in a way, this perpetuating cycle of making sure the program is dysfunctional is what I would say by introducing many of these digital tools. I'm not saying all digitization is bad, but the way it has to be done needs to be thought through, consulting the workers, consulting organizations and trade unions, and then bring it, not this kind of a diktat-oriented method. So it's really that's happening.
Thank you, Rajendran. Now it is the turn of Meenakshi.
Thank you so much, Professor Shamodar, for that question. And it actually made me think a little bit. And my sense is also very similar to what Rajendran said, because I don't think the language of securitization, for instance, is used by Adivasis. They say Bhumi Hakkalu, because the word security is not even there in the language, whether it's Gondi or Kolami or Telugu. And so articulation from Adivasis is largely around the using the language of rights when they talk amongst themselves. But when they bring in a lawyer who then represent them elsewhere, it changes into security because then it has greater currency in the fora that you're talking about. But also interestingly, I think it was in 2008 or 2007, if I'm not wrong, at the World Bank Land Conference that this person, Ritu Sinha, spoke about India's land security, because land rights in India is presumptive. It's not conclusive, unlike many other countries, which means that the title deed in and of itself does not guarantee that everybody has land rights. It's valid until and unless somebody else contests it. So it's all based on a set of documents that we establish stuff. And she said that for land security, we need to move towards conclusive titling. And this is where digitalization efforts come in, because the idea is with algorithmic precision, we'll fix everything and we'll make sure that everything is transparent, opaque, no longer opaque. We'll get rid of the middlemen, and therefore everything will become secure. But this is, of course, not how social movements, when they speak to Adivasis or Dalits or Bahujans or even others in urban marginal communities speak, because they have to use the word right, because for people it's about something more, like it's about the social life of land, and also being able to claim other resources. Because when you have the title, let's say in Utnur, where I did my field work, the title deed allowed people who did not have physical land still to claim Raitu Bandhu, because the title is all you need. It allowed them to claim seed and fertilizer subsidies even as they were employed as land laborers elsewhere. So there's a right still associated with it. But as Rajendran said, I think the security bit would be like a subset and something that you use to sort of play the game as well, to negotiate and navigate the larger discourse. To Samatha's question about digitalization, and I think this also goes back to one of the questions that was posed to Rajendran by Ritwijit, if I'm not pronouncing her name wrong, and if I did, I'm very sorry. So Telangana is one of those states, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, because Telangana came into existence in 2014, so we have to trace slightly backwards. Telangana and Andhra are two states in India that have accomplished over 90% of digitalization when it comes to land rights. So everything, cadasters are digitized. Back in the day, not back in the day, a few years ago, the integrated land record management portal was uploaded. So you could actually see land cadasters online. Now, the interesting bit was that when KCR, who was then the chief minister, became chief minister, he said that this was the way in which Telangana is going to be different from Andhra Pradesh, and we'll ensure that finally people will have their rights to land. However, when the digitalization processes came out, around like several people started filing complaints because suddenly the land rights, I mean, the acreage that was on the digital portal no longer matched the paperwork. And then there were questions of how land had been transferred from one person to another. So the Dharani portal said something and the paper said something else. So there was all sort of confusion. And the other bit is also that Telangana is a particular state where when assignment lands were distributed, they did not make internal subdivisions. So even though the larger plot of land had a boundary, let's say of 100 acres, they must have given many people like 2 acres or 3 acres or 4 acres. So these boundaries were not maintained and the online map also did not have it. So suddenly people's lands were moving within this boundary, and which again sort of produces the same opacity that we talk about. And relatedly, what you also see is that the bureaucracy still, despite all of these technocratic efforts, the bureaucracy still had to rely on interpretative forms of labor from lower level functioning, lower functionaries of the government, whether it was the patwari or the broker or this MC or the surveyor, to make sense of these land records, simply because Telangana has a history of the Nizam's land record, then other kinds of land records. So there's multiple languages, multiple tenurial systems. So it's not, I mean, so basically these digital systems produce the same kind of opacity that paper-based records had as well, except that there's a digital divide, so people weren't always able to access it. And as of 2 months ago, Telangana has decided to get rid of the old portal and come up with something new and give land a unique ID like Aadhaar. So it's called Budhar. And I'm still working on it because my project is just 3 months old. So you have all of these things going on. So I hope that clarifies some stuff.
Thank you, Meenakshi. Now, Gopalji.
The rights discourse, actually, the question by Ranveer Da reminded me of deliberation at the annual general body meeting of the board of Rio Tinto, one of the 3 biggest mining companies. In one of the meetings several years back, one of the board of directors said that you have right to land only if you can defend it. So long as you can defend it. Few years back, just 3-4 years back, I was at a land conference in India International Center, which was funded by the Omdiyar network, the biggest CSR funder in India. And there they were saying that we will ensure funding to organizations if they talk in terms of land tenures, not in terms of land rights. So I asked them that I remember the AGM meeting where you said rights are there only as long as you can defend it. Now you are saying you have right to rights language. You, if you will have the right to if you exercise that right, you will not get CSR funds. So the idea is that people should not talk in terms of rights. They are not actually. It's not a relationship between state and citizen. It's a relationship between a metaphor, a hybrid of a state and a corporate, commercial jars. So we are subjects of theirs, and how do they, exercise the fact that we are subjects and we are subjugated and we do not use rights language is through data grids, water grids, because somebody wants. In fact, I remember I had taken a note that in the first volume of Capital, Marx had talked about centralization being the key tendency of the capitalist forces, and they abhor competition. So the centralization of data, centralization of water resources, centralization of, rightly Meenakshi mentioned Bhu Aadhaar. In this budget, Nirmala Sitharaman talked about Bhu Aadhaar. In fact, the original draft land titling bill, they didn't talk about land rights. Land titling bill referred to linking all land titles to Aadhaar. Nandan Nilekani's book, Imagining India, refers to a book by Hernando de Soto. The name of the book is the mystery of capitalism. Why, I don't know if I recollect the name right, why capitalism succeeded in the West and failed elsewhere. This was written prior to 2008. Had he written it post 2008, he would have not titled the book that way. So Hernando de Soto is quoted by Nandan Nilekani saying that if everybody has a digital ID, there will be a perfect land market, a perfect common land market. And that will be facilitated, and the constitutional amendment which abolished fundamental right to property, that can be restored through these digital IDs. So the project of digitalizing digital identity is not confined to identifying individuals. It is about, which was articulated by Sam Pitroda, who was the head of the public information infrastructure and innovations. He said the real idea is to tag every individual, tag every institution, tag all bioresources, tag all land resources. And he said after that tagging, a grid is created which can be controlled. Unique Identification Authority of India had a white paper, which they have removed. I have a copy of that, where they used simile of water flow for data flow. He who controls the water flow controls, successful social control happens. He who controls data flow, social surveillance, this is panopticon as well as synopticon unfolding in front of our own eyes. And I totally agree with the worry expressed by the sadness or expressed by Rajendran about census not happening. Although in 2021 budget was allocated for the 2021 census, but it was not done. And when it was not done, when it was announced, it was said it will be a first digital census. So now the sense is, and one is getting from the literature survey, is that Aadhaar is itself NPR, and it is an unending census process where 4 kinds of data is being collected: demographic data, biometric data, and metadata, and besides that, authentication data. The authentication failures, I think Rajendran was referring to. All
I think we'll come to Gopalji later. And meanwhile, before we conclude, Somprasad Nirula has a comment and a question. He says that linking of traditional security and modern security ideas like human security, they are not able to address the issues of minority and marginalized community. And therefore, we need to critically revisit the notion of security. How can we define that will capture historically marginalized community? Is there any linkage between the sustainable development goals and security approach? So will Rajendran or Meenakshi, because Gopalji is not audible, so would you like to address this question, any of you?
I can bite the bullet first.
Yeah, please.
And I'll be very brief. So if you look at the UN Habitat's website, there is a page on land tenure security. And as you scroll down, the first sentence has both secure and right. So it says secure land tenure and property rights are fundamental to accessing adequate housing, food security, and livelihoods. But as you scroll down, it then says that land tenure security is crucial for the realization of human rights, poverty reduction, economic prosperity, and sustainable development, leading to the attainment of sustainable development goals, the new urban agenda, and other regional and country level policy initiatives. And you see this sort of similar narrative that's, in IPCC reports, in other kinds of documents that are in these, at COP26, in fact, we had the security-based approach language also being used, but concomitantly with rights-based as well. But it almost seemed as if, they sort of converge in a certain way. And you also have indigenous populations, whether from Peru, aboriginal populations from Australia, all of them also understanding that you need to play this game. You have to articulate your articulate your rights in the language sometimes of the oppressor, so that you sort of get what you need as well. So it's almost as if there's reverse interpolation going on to sort of bring in security and rights together to get what you want. So that is my sense, if that.
Thank you. Thank you, Meenakshi. Rajendran?
No, I think Meenakshi very perfectly encapsulated. I don't have any specific addition to it, but again, I think my concern is that if we build this linkage, if we keep on building this linkage, then in over a period of time, are we is there an apprehension of diluting rights? That's the only that's my only fear and apprehension.
Thank you. I think we had very perceptive presentations and comments from the panelists in this webinar. So before we conclude, I would request Shamata, our colleague, to identify. I'm not requesting her to summarize, but to identify the major takeaways from this webinar, if we can say.
Thank you, Shobhashatida. Summarizing is my #1 skill, but I will not try to do that because this webinar has been so enriching, both so diverse, but also so well articulated that it will take some time to even summarize this. So what I will do, if we think about 2 to 3 things that have emerged from this discussion, something that Ranobida has already framed for us. So what is the interplay between rights and security, different approaches, different histories, but also what are the implications of sticking to either the rights narrative or to sticking to the security narrative, or when they are in interaction with each other, like Rajendran just ended by saying, do the security discourse does the security discourse contain the risk of diluting the rights discourse? And to this, I will add something else. As you know, a person in college and university in the early 2000s, I was also taught to question the rights discourse itself. So, which is again a third dimension that we may add to this discussion. And we've been talking about it for a few months now while we've been working on this project. Second, each presenter spoke about very, very concrete instances, but what emerged were the connections between historically marginalized groups of people, be it people who are vulnerable because they are in a certain river basin, or they have been exposed to certain kind of water scarcity, or they do not have food security, or they do not have land security, and the governmental statist mechanisms that work increasingly with the aid of different kinds of apparatuses, such as it could be documentation, so it could be something as the physical ration card, but it could also be something as the discourse of national security, which pits the access of water or the lack of access of water as a question that is of immense concern to nations, as opposed to of concern to the people who are in the vicinity of that water. So we have very concrete instances which emerge out of certain historical dispossessions, which continue even, and since we were talking about India, even 75 years after the independence of India, and newer measures, whether they are older bureaucratic forms like physical documents, or newer digital forms like the Aadhaar card, the Bhu Aadhaar card, and various other documentations, processes, internet connectivity, matching your biometrics with what is on the record, they continue to dispossess people who have been historically dispossessed. And what I think is the third connecting thread that ran through all of this is that there is, in each of these instances, there is an umbrella narrative. The umbrella narrative, which is the governmental narrative, the official narrative, sometimes it's national, sometimes as Gopal showed us, through multiple instances, it is international. The umbrella narrative posits something as a question of national security. And it's possible, although Meenakshi did not exactly talk about it, but it's also both the land and food security, and definitely the water security questions can be imagined from the perspective of the nation state, and perhaps greater, bigger actors like corporations and other international bodies, to consider people's livelihood and life issues to be threats to national or international security. So what we are, I think, trying to do in this project, to think about how overarching security discourse actually has a very material, micro, and human manifestations. And when human security often poses a counter narrative, a challenge to, but is often also undermined by macro, national, international, corporate, global, United Nations, or other important organizations' vision of security. So I think these are some of the key takeaways that we are going to keep with us as we move forward into this project. We've also planned to do 3 webinars on security at Crossroads. This was just the first episode, so on land, food, and water. And we hope to have 2 more iterations of it later in the year. And we hope that we will be able to bring back the threads that emerged today in both our ongoing research as well as in our public outreach, such as the ones that we've been doing or we plan to do with these webinars. I think that's all that I have to say right now. I'm also, Sucharita, do you think we should call this a day?
Before Sucharita takes over, let me also read what Gopalji has written, because he was not audible. He says Aadhaar number is a 12-digit number and it is a brand name of unique identification number. It's like Dalda name used for Banashpati ghee. Aadhaar is not a card. Bengal Assembly passed a resolution against it. And with these words, before we conclude today's webinar, let me thank Rajendran, Meenakshi, and Gopalji for being the main speakers, main panelists today in this webinar. And you have contributed a lot, and you have enriched the entire discussion. And all the participants who had comments and questions, including Professor Shomadhar and all other colleagues. And before we conclude, I would also like to thank all our colleagues at CRG, including Shamata and Sucharita, for organizing this webinar.